So welcome to Copperwheat Films. Yes, this is my bedroom. I know this is very weird to be filming in here. But this is where I've been for the last 12 weeks or so. So I'm not going anywhere soon either, unfortunately. But this is a useful thing to show because a lot of people are finding themselves in a similar position where they're having to film in some weird places or perhaps even film yourself for the first time. So these tips are going to be really helpful for like the traditional sit-down interviews where you can be wherever you need to be. But these tips should also be really helpful for you if you are having to film in weird places around your house too. Shooting interviews are really important. As videographers, at least for me, it's probably the most important thing that I do. It's one of the things that I do the most of. Most of the stories that I make or films I create are based around someone or multiple people talking to camera. So figuring out ways that you can make them as good as you possibly can is really important, especially because often when you go to film someone, the situation isn't always ideal. Perhaps they haven't got a lot of time, perhaps their venue isn't that great. So these tips I think can be really helpful because they don't cost loads of money, you don't need to buy loads of gear, and also they're things that can be done really quickly and simply. They don't take a lot of time either, but I think can really improve your interviews. So the first thing we're going to talk about is about creating depth. One of the first things I do when I get to a venue, especially if we haven't got a lot of time or the venue isn't very attractive visually, the first thing I do is I look around and I try to figure out how I can get the person I'm filming as far away from the back wall as I possibly can. So here's a good example of a really poor venue choice, my children's bedroom. And you can see the difference between me in the corner and then me moving away from it. Now I haven't lit this or anything like that, but you can see that the difference is big. So all I've actually done is I've just brought the person I'm filming away from the back wall. I've moved the camera back as well, and then I've just zoomed in on the camera. Now that does a few things. Firstly, it just creates more of an interesting shot because no longer is the person you're filming and the background both level with one another on like the same plane in 3D space. You've created some separation now, which makes the shot look much more interesting. It also means that we can blur the background out, which does a couple of things. One, it can hide anything that you want to hide. Either your venue isn't that attractive, it's just a bit boring, or the worst, it's just really hideous. You can use this trick to hide it because it just kind of melts into some sort of blur and you can't really see what's going on. And it also gives it that kind of professional feel that people expect to see, that kind of nice blurred background. Here's an example of just a really boring office that I filmed in. We've just moved them away from the wall. And here's one where we literally are as far away as you can possibly get from the back wall, because that again was just a big office space. So if you're ever stuck, you get to a place, doesn't look that nice, just bring the person you're filming away from the wall, move the camera back, zoom in, and it's going to look 10 times better. So the next tip I want to talk about is about using natural light. Now when most people think about lighting their videos, they will think about the whole 3-point lighting thing, about big softboxes, all those type of things. Now those things are really good, and I do use them and did use them loads, but what I found was that I'd spent lots of money on this gear, but then I was having to go to all these venues, sometimes like 3-4 in a day, set all my lights up, film somewhere, pack it all down, move on to the next place, set them all up, and for just one person that became way too much to do every time, especially when everyone's in a bit of a rush as well. So now I normally just take one light with me, and sometimes if I can I will leave it in the car, and that all depends on whether there are natural sources of light coming in to the room. A good example of this is I went to do some pub videos recently where I had to film about 4 or 5 different pubs a day over the course of a couple of weeks, and I just decided I wasn't going to go set my lights up every single time if there was natural light, and most of the time I didn't, and it was completely fine and looked really nice. As you can see here on these examples, I didn't actually use any light at all that I brought with me. This is all natural light just coming in through the window to the side of the person I'm filming. And one of the things that I did buy, and I do use really regularly, and don't worry, this doesn't cost you hardly anything at all, is a sheet like this. Now this sheet I'll put a link to it in the description. It's so handy, you take it everywhere with me now because I can just hang it up over a window and it just softens the light. So if the sun is a bit harsh or a little bit inconsistent, like it's going in and out of clouds, you can hang this up over a window and it just creates almost like your own little softbox. So lighting is really important for interviews, makes it look so much better, but it doesn't have to be something that costs you an absolute fortune. So the next thing I want to talk about is about good audio. Now this is actually one of those things that people don't really think about very much when it comes to shooting video, but I think is one of the things that makes the biggest difference. If you listen to me now without being mic'd up properly, this audio is coming straight from the camera in front of me. It's really hard to listen to and would be really hard to engage with for a long period of time. So just making sure that you have good audio is massively important. You could kind of get away with your visuals being slightly off as long as you can hear what the person is saying, but the other way around it just won't work at all. There's lots of different ways you can get good sounding audio. You can buy lapel mics which clip directly onto the person that's talking on camera, and that can be either transmitted wirelessly to a receiver and then straight into the camera, or just recorded straight to a belt pack which has an SD card in, or even to your iPhone. If that's not the type of thing you want, you can get shotgun microphones, you can get handheld devices, loads of different things. And actually the price of these things has come down hugely now, so it's really not that difficult to get good sounding audio without having to spend tons of money. So don't be tempted just to focus on the visuals. That's only part of the whole thing you're creating for someone to experience. Make sure that you spend as much focus on how it sounds as well as how it looks. So the next tip is slightly left field. This isn't about how to make something look good, and it's not about how to make something sound good. This is about how to actually get the best out of the person you are filming. Because something can sound great, it can look really cinematic, but if the content isn't there, and you don't know how to conduct an interview, then people aren't really going to pay much attention to your video, and it's not going to serve the purpose either. So before I was a filmmaker, I worked in a mental health and bereavement service as a clinician, and I used to spend tons of time with families and children and teenagers, helping them to kind of share their story with me. And I learned lots of tips and tricks through that time to allow people to do that. And one of the things that I learned then, which is really helpful now as a filmmaker, is about the power of silence. Now that sounds a bit weird. So we've all had those moments where we're sat with someone that we perhaps don't know very well, and there's that awkward silence and you don't really know what to say, neither do they, and there's this overriding sense that you need to jump in and say something, and you might have done that and said something a bit stupid. And that is really, really useful, because when it comes to making films, you as an interviewer will be sat there asking questions to the person that's on camera, and they'll answer your question, and then afterwards the temptation as an interviewer is to jump in and try and make this as comfortable as possible and ask your next question. But if you're brave enough to just wait a second and let that little bit of awkward silence creep in, the person who you are filming will also feel that awkwardness and will want to jump in and say something as well. Now, people don't like to repeat themselves, so the chances are the person will say something entirely new, either a completely new insight into something they've said before, or just rephrasing what they've already said. Either way, that's really useful, because then as an editor you've got different things to pick from, which will make your film so much better. So hold your nerve, obviously don't wait for too long because that's weird, but just let the other person feel that awkwardness and they will jump in and say something fresh, which will be really helpful for you. So that's just one of the things you can do to conduct interviews better. I've actually written an ebook about this, which is in the description below, about lots of different things you can do to plan and conduct interviews in a way that gets the best out of people, using all the experience I had before as a counsellor. So if you want to support me or the channel, then that'd be really great if you wanted to go to that link. Little plug. So the last tip is about using different focal lengths. And what I mean by that is about creating different shots within your interview. So you haven't got the same just medium shot. You've got a close up, you've got a wide, and you've got a medium, or even just a couple of different variations. Now you might think, well, I haven't got multiple cameras, how do I do that? Well, one of the things that I do, I normally only use one camera, but I just simply move the camera backwards and forwards for my different questions. So I might ask my first question when I ask them to introduce themselves. I have the camera further away. I then say, okay, I'm just going to shift the camera for the next one, and I move in, and then I go back, and I move in and I go back. Or if I've got a zoom lens, I will just zoom the camera in and out for my different questions. Now that's actually really helpful for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you that variation, makes things look a bit more professional, looks like you've got a multi-camera setup, but also just gives the person you're filming a little bit of time to compose themselves between each one. So that's really helpful. The only thing about that is it takes a little bit of planning, because you don't want to be asking like the really emotional questions or the really personal ones and be far away, like a wide shot. On those you want to be close up. So you want to kind of plan your questions so that you alternate different positions, and so that the close-up ones end or land on the questions that are a bit more personal. So it takes a little bit of planning, but just jotting down the questions and just write down which ones you want to be close up for and further away for. But I think that gives a whole lot of variation and makes your shoots look much more professional, and gives the person a bit of a break to have a breather between questions. So give that a shot as well. That'll make a massive difference to your project. So thank you for watching. I hope you found those tips helpful. That's not a comprehensive list of all the things that you can do, but there's just a few things there that you can use if you're at a bit of a pinch, to make your videos look a bit better and sound a bit better, and have the content that will make them a bit better as well. So if you haven't subscribed, then please do, and I'll see you again soon.